Disclaimer: the following 10 people looked at millions of years of wild evolution and thought, I can take it. This is a highlight reel of nature's most brutal comebacks against human arrogance. These are not instructions. They are cautionary tales. Prepare for a masterclass in how not to interact with wildlife. 1. The bison matador. There are certain places on Earth that serve as natural filters for the gene pool. Magnificent landscapes that subtly weed out those who treat the planet like their personal amusement park. Yellowstone National Park, on a crisp August afternoon, was about to become one such filter. Meet Gary, a 32-year-old sales associate who believed his success in selling extended warranties on printers somehow translated into a deep, instinctual understanding of the animal kingdom. His girlfriend, Brenda, was filming, as was her sacred duty, documenting Gary's attempt to become the next viral sensation. The subject of his imminent stardom was a 1-ton American bison, a creature that looks like a furry brown minivan with anger management issues and horns that can puncture steel. The bison was doing what bison do, existing peacefully, chewing on some grass and generally minding its own colossal business. But Gary, you see, had a brilliant idea. He'd seen bullfights on TV. He knew the deal. It wasn't about hurting the animal, he assured Brenda. It was about showing it who's boss, a display of human dominance and grace. Spoiler alert, the bison was not open to a dialogue about the food chain. Now, for anyone who passed third-grade biology, a bison is a herbivore, sure, but it's also a freight train with a 3-second fuse. It can run at 35 miles per hour, faster than you can scream, "I've made a terrible mistake." And it possesses a skull dense enough to headbutt a pickup truck into next Tuesday. Gary, however, had missed that particular lesson, probably because he was busy practicing his signature in a notebook. He stripped off his vibrant, offensively red windbreaker, a color he believed was key to the whole operation. "It's all in the movement, babe," he whispered to Brenda, as if he were revealing a sacred matador secret. "You gotta be fluid like water." He then began waving the jacket in a manner that was less fluid like water and more inflatable tube man having a seizure outside a mattress store. He shouted, "Hey, Toro, over here!" at an animal that had never been to Spain and couldn't care less about its taunts. The bison initially just stared, its massive head lifting slowly, its dark eyes blinking with a look of profound bovine confusion. It was the look of an ancient being witnessing for the first time a level of stupidity so pure it almost defied physics. Other tourists started to notice, pulling out their phones, a circle of digital vultures sensing a Darwin Award in the making. The bison gave its first warning, a low huff, a puff of steam from its nostrils. It pawed the ground once. In any sane person's language, this translates to, "I am seconds away from turning you into a cautionary tale." Gary saw it as progress. "See? He's playing along," he exclaimed, taking a few bold steps closer. This was the final invitation the bison needed. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, the 1-ton wall of muscle and fur dropped its head and charged. It wasn't a run, it was an eruption. Gary's face, a triumphant smirk just a moment before, morphed into a perfect O of terror. He had no time to be fluid, no time to be water. He was a stationary object, and the laws of physics were about to hold a very aggressive seminar directly on his person. The impact wasn't loud, but it was definitive, a wet thud that made everyone wince. Gary was launched a solid 15 feet into the air, spinning end over end like a discarded chew toy, his red jacket fluttering behind him like a sad, flimsy cape. He landed in a heap, a silent testament to the fact that nature does not, in fact, grade on a curve. The park rangers who later arrived could only shake their heads, offering the standard, weary statement about respecting wildlife. Brenda's footage never made Gary a star, but it did become an internal training video for park staff on how not to interact with the locals, a permanent, high-definition legacy of a man who tried to bullfight a mountain and lost spectacularly. 2. The kangaroo boxer, Australia. A land forged in nature's most aggressive kiln, where even the fluffy creatures want you dead. It's a place that breeds a certain kind of tough, no-nonsense individual. But it also occasionally produces a specimen like Shane, a man whose blood alcohol level was often higher than his IQ. On a scorching Saturday afternoon in the outback of Queensland, Shane and his mates were celebrating something. It might have been a birthday, or it might have just been the fact that the beer was cold. In the middle of their festivities, a familiar visitor appeared at the edge of the property. A massive red kangaroo, a creature so ridiculously muscular, it looked like it had been hitting the gym since the Cretaceous period. This kangaroo, nicknamed Big Kev by the locals, was a known character, mostly for his intimidating size and his habit of staring at people as if they owed him money. For weeks, Shane had been complaining about Big Kev, claiming the kangaroo was looking at him funny. Today, fueled by 6 cans of lager and the enthusiastic encouragement of his equally inebriated friends, Shane decided to settle this interspecies beef once and for all. "Right," he slurred, pushing himself up from his plastic chair. "I'm gonna box the roo." It's a phrase that should, by all accounts, trigger an immediate and forceful intervention, but to Shane's mates, it sounded like a national sporting event was about to unfold in their backyard. Now, a quick lesson in marsupial combat is in order. Kangaroos don't box in the traditional sense. They don't jab or weave. Their strategy is far more brutal. They balance on their thick, powerful tail, using it like a third leg, and then launch a 2-footed kick with hind legs tipped with claws sharp enough to gut a wild dog. Bringing boxing gloves to this encounter is like trying to stop a chainsaw with a pillow. Shane, however, was undeterred by biology. He rummaged in his shed and emerged with a dusty pair of old boxing gloves, which he strapped on with a look of grim determination. He bounced on the balls of his feet, doing his best Rocky Balboa impression as he shuffled out to meet his furry nemesis. "Come on then, you big lug," he yelled. "Let's see what you got." Big Kev just stood there, twitching his nose, utterly unimpressed. Shane danced around for a bit, throwing a few wild haymakers that missed by a comical margin. His friends were in hysterics, filming the whole absurd spectacle on their phones. Emboldened by his opponent's apparent lack of interest, Shane closed the distance and landed a soft, clumsy punch on the kangaroo's chest. It was a terrible, terrible mistake. It was like he had flipped a switch from confused marsupial to prehistoric death machine. In an instant, Big Kev leaned back on his tail, a move of terrifying biomechanical efficiency. Before Shane could even process what was happening, 2 enormous feet, each ending in a formidable talon, shot forward with the force of a hydraulic press. The kick connected squarely with Shane's torso. It wasn't a punch, it was an eviction notice from the mortal coil. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him flying backwards, the air leaving his lungs in a single, final gasp. He landed with the limp finality of a marionette whose strings had been cut. His friends' laughter died in their throats, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. The impromptu boxing match was over in a single round. Big Kev gave Shane's motionless form a brief, disdainful sniff, then hopped away casually, as if he had just been taking out the trash. The resulting emergency call was surely one for the record books, an operator trying to make sense of the phrase, "My mate got knocked out by a kangaroo." In the end, Shane became a local legend, but not as the tough guy who fought a roo. He became the cautionary tale told over beers, a permanent reminder that in the great Australian ring of life, you never, ever try to go toe-to-toe with the heavyweight champ. 3. The alligator nest swap. The Florida Everglades is a place where nature has perfected the art of saying stay out. It's a humid, buzzing, primordial soup of things that can bite, sting, or swallow you whole. It's also apparently a place that attracts entrepreneurs of a particularly dim-witted variety. Enter Ricky, a man whose get-rich-quick schemes always seem to involve outsmarting creatures with brains the size of a peanut. His latest venture was, in his mind, pure genius, stealing alligator eggs to sell on the exotic pet black market. But Ricky wasn't just a common thief. He considered himself a criminal artist. He wasn't just going to take the eggs. No, that was amateur hour. He was going to replace them with chicken eggs he'd painted a muddy green, thereby ensuring the mother alligator wouldn't notice a thing until it was too late. His plan was built on the fundamentally flawed assumption that a mother alligator, a creature that has been perfecting the art of parenthood for about 8 million years, could be fooled by a dozen spray-painted eggs from Walmart. To understand the sheer depth of this stupidity, one must appreciate the American alligator, A mother gator is one of the most ferocious parents on the planet. She guards her nest with a level of paranoia and aggression that would make a Secret Service agent look relaxed. She can detect the slightest vibration, the faintest scent, and she can move from a state of complete stillness to a full-speed, tooth-filled assault in less time than it takes to say, "Oh crap." The idea that she wouldn't notice a bumbling human swapping out her large, leathery eggs for small, brittle, chicken-scented imposters was, to put it mildly, optimistic. Ricky, however, was a man of unshakable confidence. He found a promising-looking nest mound near the water's edge, a large pile of rotting vegetation that was radiating heat. He waited patiently in the mangroves, sweating through his shirt, until he saw the large female gator slide silently into the water for a presumed hunting trip. This was his moment. Clutching his carton of counterfeit eggs, he scrambled out of the bushes and made his way to the nest. He worked with a frantic, clumsy energy, digging into the warm compost. He pulled out the first real gator egg, marveling at its size, before carefully placing one of his painted fakes in its place. "Perfect," he muttered to himself, feeling a surge of pride in his own cunning. He swapped a second, then a third. He was so engrossed in his work, so focused on the mechanics of his brilliant heist, that he failed to notice a subtle change in the water nearby. He didn't see the two small bumps that had risen to the surface, looking for all the world like a pair of floating cypress knees. He didn't see the almost imperceptible ripple moving towards the shore. The mother alligator wasn't hunting. She was watching. She was observing this strange, lanky mammal desecrating her nursery, and her ancient reptilian brain was making a very simple calculation. Threat. Must be eliminated. Ricky had just reached for his fourth chicken egg when the world exploded. With a surge of primordial power that threw water and mud 10 feet in the air, the mother gator launched herself from the water. She wasn't just fast, she was a biological missile of maternal fury. Ricky looked up, his eyes wide with the sudden horrifying realization that his business plan had a fatal flaw. He had no time to scream. There was just the blur of green scales, the terrifying geometry of an opening jaw, and then a crushing, final pressure. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission found his abandoned boat a few days later. Of Ricky, there was no sign, save for a single spray-painted green chicken egg lying broken on the riverbank, a tiny, pathetic monument to a man who thought he could pull a fast one on millions of years of evolution. The mother gator, meanwhile, had likely already rebuilt her nest, her real eggs safe and warm, blissfully unaware of the short, stupid drama that had just concluded. 4. The moose call Romeo. Have you ever wondered where truly catastrophic ideas come from? They're rarely born in solitude. They need an incubator, a support system of enablers, usually in the form of friends who mistake sheer lunacy for legendary behavior. This particular tragedy was born on a crisp autumn evening in the Alaskan wilderness, where a man named Kevin and his two buddies were on a camping trip. Kevin was a software developer from Seattle, a man who believed that because he could debug a million lines of code, he could also debug the complex operating system of Mother Nature. His fatal flaw was a desperate need to be the fun guy, the one with the stories to tell back at the office. As they sat around the campfire, the haunting, low call of a female moose echoed through the valley. It was the sound of the wild, a primal invitation. To his friends, it was a moment of awe. To Kevin, it was a challenge. "Dude, I can totally do that," he announced, a dangerous gleam in his eye. Now, for the uninitiated, the moose mating season, or the rut, is not a gentle candlelit affair. A bull moose during the rut is essentially a 1,500-pound cocktail of testosterone, adrenaline, and pure, unadulterated rage, topped off with a rack of bone antlers that can turn a car door into modern art. They are looking for two things: a receptive female or a rival male to completely annihilate. There is no third option. A poorly executed imitation of a female's call doesn't sound alluring. It sounds like a scrawny, pathetic challenger picking a fight in a bar full of heavyweight champions. This was a nuance of wilderness communication that Kevin's subscription to Outdoorsy Guy magazine had failed to mention. He found his instrument of doom: a large, empty plastic gallon jug. It's all about the resonance. he explained with the unearned confidence of a TED Talk speaker. He began blowing into the jug, producing a sound that was less amorous female moose and more dying tuba. His friends, instead of performing the civic duty of tackling him, burst out laughing and started filming. "You sound like a Wookiee giving birth, man," one of them howled. This only encouraged Kevin. He stood up, puffed out his chest, and let out another series of pathetic, gurgling moans into his plastic amplifier. And that's when the forest answered back. A deep, guttural grunt echoed from the tree line, a sound that vibrated in their chests. Kevin beamed. "See, I'm irresistible," he declared, completely misinterpreting a sound that clearly meant, "I hear you, and I am coming to end you." He gave the jug one final triumphant blow. The response was immediate. The loud, percussive crack of a large tree branch snapping, followed by the sound of something immense and very, very angry crashing through the undergrowth. His friends' laughter vaporized, replaced by wide-eyed panic. They were smart enough to start backing away. Kevin, however, was frozen, caught in the headlights of his own ego. A moment later, a creature that looked less like an animal and more like a mythological beast of destruction exploded from the darkness. It was a bull moose of gargantuan proportions, its eyes burning with homicidal fury, its massive antlers lowered like the battering ram of an invading army. It had not come for a date. It had come to violently dispute a territorial claim made by a plastic jug. Kevin had just enough time for his brain to register the catastrophic error in his romantic overture before the founding 500-pound freight train of antlers and fury slammed into him. The impact was absolute. He was tossed aside like a lawn ornament in a hurricane. The official park ranger's report, in its dry, procedural language, would later attribute the incident to imprudent acoustic provocation of wildlife during peak rutting season. But his friends knew the truth. Kevin didn't die in a noble battle with nature. He was fatally catfished by a moose he'd invited over himself, leaving behind a legacy immortalized in a shaky, 5-second phone clip and a slightly dented plastic jug that now sits in an evidence locker as a monument to the universe's deadliest booty call. 5. The hippo's open mouth policy. Let's talk about the marshmallow. It's the fluffiest, most harmless confection in the human diet. It's a key ingredient in children's campfire stories and hot chocolate. It is a symbol of pure, innocent joy. It is also, in this particular case, the catalyst for one of the most spectacularly bad decisions ever made on the African continent. We find ourselves on a small safari boat, puttering along a placid river in Zambia. The boat is filled with tourists, all dutifully snapping photos of the exotic wildlife. Among them is Todd, a retired orthodontist from Ohio, a man who spent 40 years putting his hands inside people's mouths and came away with the belief that all open mouths were friendly, welcoming places. As the boat kept a respectful, safe distance from a pod of hippos, one of the massive bulls surfaced and opened its jaws in a prodigious yawn. It was a breathtaking sight, a cavernous pink maw armed with tusks the size of bananas. The local guide immediately began to explain the reality of this gesture. A hippo's yawn is not a sign of fatigue. It is a threat display. It is the hippo's way of saying, "Behold my dental arsenal." This mouth can bisect a 10-foot crocodile. I am the reason this is the most dangerous large animal in Africa. Please, for the love of all that is holy, do not mistake this for an invitation. Todd, however, was not listening to the guide. Todd was listening to the little voice in his head, the same one that told him Hawaiian shirts were appropriate for any occasion. He saw that open mouth not as a warning, but as a target. He saw a game. In his pocket, he had a small bag of marshmallows for snacking. A plan, fully formed and dripping with idiocy, bloomed in his mind. He was going to feed the hippo a marshmallow. He leaned over to his wife and whispered his intention. Her horrified expression should have been a red flag the size of Texas, but Todd interpreted it as a challenge to his skills. He convinced the boat driver to edge just a little bit closer for a better photo, he claimed. The guide was now practically yelling at him to sit down, but Todd was in the zone. He stood up, rocking the small boat, and took a wide, athletic stance. "It's all in the wrist," he chuckled, pulling a single, puffy white marshmallow from his bag. He took aim at the hippo's mouth, which was still open in its magnificent, deadly display. He saw himself as a hero, the man who befriended the river beast with a sugary treat. He let it fly. The marshmallow sailed through the air in a perfect, hopeful arc, and landed with a pathetic little plop in the water, a few feet short of the hippo's nose. For a moment, nothing happened. The hippo just stared at the floating white blob. Then, it submerged. The guide's face went pale. "It's charging," he whispered. Before anyone could react, the water beneath the boat erupted. The hippo, propelled by a volcanic surge of territorial rage, rammed the underside of the vessel with its massive skull. The boat was flipped over as if it were a bath toy. Todd, along with everyone else, was thrown into the murky, crocodile-infested water. But Todd had the distinct misfortune of landing closest to his intended target. The last thing he saw was not a friendly, yawning giant, but the reality of his mistake. The same cavernous mouth he had tried to feed, now closing around him with the force of an industrial car crusher. His final contribution to the world was becoming the human centerpiece in the very threat display he had so profoundly misunderstood. He became a legend among safari guides, a permanent cautionary tale that now ends with the very specific rule: "And for God's sake, don't try to feed the 2-ton river demons." 6. The Komodo dragon's tooth. There's a certain type of tourist, a collector, for whom a vacation is not about the experience but about the acquisition. They don't want memories, they want artifacts. A t-shirt won't do. They need something authentic, something real, a piece of the place they can display on a shelf back home to prove they were there. For Marcus, a man who treated the world's ecosystems like a personal souvenir shop, this philosophy would lead him to his final, disastrous act of procurement. He was on Komodo Island, the ancestral home of the world's largest lizard, the Komodo dragon. And Marcus had decided he was going home with the ultimate keepsake, a genuine Komodo dragon tooth. It's important to understand that a Komodo dragon is not just a large reptile. It is a perfectly evolved killing machine. It is a living, breathing biohazard. Its saliva is a venomous brew of anticoagulants and toxins that send a victim into shock and paralysis, while its mouth is also home to a gallery of flesh-eating bacteria. A single bite is a death sentence, often a slow and agonizing one. Furthermore, their apparent laziness is a predatory tactic. They bask in the sun, looking as harmless as a log, conserving energy until an opportunity presents itself. Then, they can explode with startling speed and unholy power. Marcus knew some of this, in the way one knows things from a documentary watched late at night. But he also knew that after a large meal, they were sluggish and docile for hours. It was this sliver of information that he twisted into a permission slip for his grand theft. He soon found his target, a huge 9-foot male, bloated and motionless under the Indonesian sun, clearly digesting a recent, sizable kill. To Marcus, it looked less like a dangerous predator and more like a scaly outdoor sofa. His guide was momentarily distracted, explaining the island's flora to another couple. This was Marcus's window. He had come prepared. From the pocket of his cargo shorts, he produced a pair of needle-nose pliers, a tool he'd brought specifically for this dental extraction. He told the guide he was just getting a macro shot and began to creep towards the sleeping giant. Every instinct a human has for survival should have been screaming at him, but those alarms were silenced by the siren song of his future bragging rights. He could already picture the tooth on a velvet stand next to his illegally pocketed chunk of the Roman Colosseum. He got within arm's length. The dragon didn't stir. He could smell the carrion on its breath. He could see the rows of serrated, backward-curving teeth. He selected one near the front. With his heart hammering against his ribs, he reached out with the pliers. The instant the cold steel touched the warm, reptilian gum, the dragon's world went from 0 to 1,000. The eye, a slit of ancient indifference just a second before, snapped open, black and focused. In a blur of motion that seemed to violate the laws of physics, the dragon's head whipped around. The jaws, which can exert hundreds of pounds of pressure, slammed shut on Marcus's entire forearm. He let out a choked scream as the serrated teeth sawed through flesh and bone. The dragon didn't just bite. It began to thrash violently, its powerful neck muscles designed for tearing apart water buffalo. Marcus was ragdolled, his body slammed against the hard volcanic soil. By the time the guide and others reacted, it was far too late. The dragon had already begun to drag its prize into the scrub brush, claiming its second meal of the day. The aftermath was grim. All that was recovered were Marcus's pliers and his camera, which had fallen during the attack. The park authorities, reviewing the camera's memory card, found a series of increasingly close-up shots of the dragon, culminating in a final, blurry, chaotic image taken from an angle that suggested the camera was on the ground, pointing up at a scaly underbelly. He had wanted a piece of the dragon to take home. Instead, he became a piece of the dragon, a permanent, fully digested part of the very ecosystem he had sought to plunder. 7. The wolverine kick. There is a very specific type of outdoor enthusiast who believes that owning $1,000 worth of gear from REI somehow makes them an apex predator. They have the waterproof jacket, the tactical spork, and the unshakable belief that nature is just a slightly more rugged version of their landscaped backyard. This brings us to Chad, a marketing manager on a camping trip in the Canadian Rockies, a man who viewed the wilderness as a personal brand-building opportunity. His fatal encounter wasn't with a bear or a mountain lion. It was with a creature he fundamentally, catastrophically misunderstood. While his friends were setting up a tent, Chad noticed a small, dark, furry animal sniffing around their high-end cooler. It was low to the ground, about the size of a medium dog, and incredibly stocky. Chad, drawing on his vast wildlife knowledge gleaned from cartoon characters, made his diagnosis. "Relax, guys, it's just a big badger," he announced with a dismissive wave. "A little feisty, but harmless. I'll shoo him off." What Chad was looking at was not a badger. It was a wolverine, a creature that is to a badger what a tactical nuclear warhead is to a firecracker. A wolverine is 30 pounds of condensed fury, a bundle of muscle and bone with the bite force to crush femur bones, claws that can shred tree bark, and a temperament that makes grizzly bears quietly back away. Kicking a wolverine is not like kicking a badger. It's like trying to kickstart a running wood chipper with your bare shin. His friends, who had at least seen a nature documentary or two, were a little more apprehensive. "Chad, maybe just make some noise?" one suggested nervously, but Chad was already in hero mode. "Nah, you gotta show these critters who's boss," he said, puffing out his chest. He began to march towards the wolverine with the swagger of a bouncer ejecting a troublemaker. The wolverine paused its investigation of the cooler and looked up, its small dark eyes fixing on the approaching threat. It gave a low, guttural snarl, a sound that should have been an immediate, full-stop deal-breaker for any creature with a functioning nervous system. Chad interpreted this as a sign of imminent retreat. He was now just a few feet away. "Get out of here, you!" he shouted, and then, in a moment of hubris that will be studied by Darwin Award historians for generations, he drew back his leg to deliver a firm, patronizing kick to the animal's flank. The sequence of events that followed was not a fight. It was a demolition. Before Chad's boot could even make contact, the wolverine exploded in a blur of fur and claws. It moved with a speed that seemed impossible for its stocky frame, launching itself not away from Chad, but directly onto him. It latched onto his leg, and the sound of its teeth grinding on bone was sickeningly audible. Chad's shriek of alpha male confidence turned into a high-pitched scream of pure agony. He fell backward, but the wolverine was relentless. It was a whirlwind of destruction, swarming over him, its claws and teeth finding every soft target. It was over in seconds. The wolverine, having neutralized the threat with terrifying efficiency, gave Chad's motionless body a final contemptuous sniff, and then calmly turned its attention back to the cooler, which it effortlessly ripped open with a single swipe of its claws. When the paramedics finally arrived, summoned by Chad's traumatized friends, they found a scene of shocking brutality. Chad had learned the hard way that in the wilderness, misidentification isn't just an error, it's a fatal one. He went looking for a confrontation to prove he was the boss, and ended up as a footnote in the story of a wolverine's successful quest for a stolen block of cheese. 8. The rattlesnake surgeon. The American Southwest is a landscape that doesn't suffer fools gladly. It's a beautiful, harsh place where a simple mistake can escalate into a life-or-death situation with terrifying speed. It's also a place that tends to attract a certain kind of stubborn, self-reliant individual who believes that modern medicine is a conspiracy and that the old ways are always better. Meet Earl, a man who had watched one too many John Wayne movies and had come to the conclusion that all of life's problems could be solved with grit, a pocket knife, and a profound distrust of anyone with a medical degree. While hiking in the Arizona desert, Earl had the misfortune of stepping directly on a western diamondback rattlesnake. The snake, doing exactly what millions of years of evolution had programmed it to do when threatened, bit him squarely on the calf. A sharp, searing pain shot up his leg, followed by the two distinct puncture marks. His hiking partner, a sensible man named Dave, immediately pulled out his phone to call for an airlift. "Don't you dare," Earl snarled, swatting the phone away. "That's what they want you to do. Go to a hospital. Pay $5,000 for some antivenom?" "No, sir. I know how to handle this." Earl's plan was straight out of a 1950s Western. It was a procedure known by medical professionals as literally the worst possible thing you can do. He sat down, pulled out his trusty pocket knife, and, before Dave could stop him, made two small X-shaped cuts over the fang marks, intending to help the venom bleed out. All he actually did was create a more efficient entry point for the poison into his circulatory system. But he wasn't done. The grand finale of his self-treatment was the most crucial step, sucking out the venom. Now, it's vital to understand a small piece of Earl's personal medical history that he had conveniently forgotten. For the past week, he'd been suffering from a nasty canker sore on the inside of his lip. A canker sore is, in essence, a small, open wound. Sucking highly potent, tissue-destroying hemotoxic venom through an open wound in your mouth is the biological equivalent of building a VIP express lane for poison directly to your brain. Dave pleaded with him. "Earl, for God's sake, this is insane." But Earl was a man of conviction. "It's the only way," he said grimly, and lowered his head. He put his mouth over the bloody cuts on his leg and began to suck. For a split second, he looked up with a triumphant glint in his eye, as if to say, "See, I told you." That glint was quickly replaced by a look of profound confusion. The venom, bypassing the slow, agonizing journey up his leg, had found its shortcut. It hit his bloodstream with the force of a chemical explosion. His face went slack. His eyes rolled back in his head. He collapsed sideways, the pocket knife clattering on the rocks beside him. He had successfully saved himself from a long, painful death from a rattlesnake bite by administering a much, much faster one. Dave's eventual 911 call was a masterpiece of frantic incoherence, as he tried to explain to a dispatcher that his friend had not been killed by a snake bite, but by his own jaw-droppingly stupid attempt at frontier medicine. Earl had gone out on his own terms. A true cowboy, if cowboys were known for dying from a combination of arrogance and poor oral hygiene. 9. The seagull's revenge. On the grand stage of animal adversaries, the seagull is often dismissed. It's seen as a sky rat, a feathered nuisance whose greatest crime is stealing your French fries. People forget that these are not domesticated pigeons. They are wild, surprisingly strong, and ruthlessly efficient survivalists. And on a windy afternoon at a seaside pier, a man named Frank was about to get a final fatal lesson in respecting the tenacity of a hungry gull. Frank was a petty tyrant. He was the kind of guy who'd lean on a wet paint sign just to prove it was dry. His current source of amusement was a particularly bold seagull that was eyeing his bucket of fries. Instead of just shooing it away, Frank decided to put on a show for his bored-looking family. He took a long piece of fishing line from his tackle box and, with surgical precision, tied it around a single, perfect, golden-brown French fry. "Watch this," he chortled, dangling the fry over the edge of the pier. The seagull, whose entire worldview is centered around the acquisition of unattended food, took the bait. It swooped in, but Frank would snatch the fry away at the last second. He did this 3, 4, 5 times, laughing uproariously as the bird became more and more frantic. The game, however, took an unexpected turn. On its next pass, the seagull didn't just peck. It swallowed. In one gulp, the fry and several inches of fishing line went down its gullet. Frank was momentarily stunned, and in that moment the bird panicked. It took to the sky, the fishing line trailing from its beak. The other end of that line, which Frank had carelessly looped around his index finger to keep his grip, suddenly went taut. Now, a single seagull doesn't have the lift capacity to fly away with a 200-pound man. But it doesn't need to. All it needs is to generate a sudden, unexpected, and sharp pull on a man who is standing on a slippery, moss-covered wooden pier, laughing so hard he's already off balance. The pull jerked Frank's arm forward, causing his feet to slip out from under him. He let out a yelp of surprise as he tumbled over the low railing. It wasn't a long fall, but he wasn't landing in water. He was landing on the jagged, barnacle-encrusted rocks that were exposed by the low tide. His family could only watch in horror as he hit the rocks with a sickening, final thud. The seagull, meanwhile, in its frantic aerial struggle, managed to regurgitate the fry and the line and flew off, probably no worse for the wear and already scanning for its next meal. Frank, the pier-side puppet master, was undone by his own strings. He had designed a cruel little game to demonstrate his superiority over a simple bird, and in the end, he was outsmarted and ultimately dispatched by a combination of a single potato stick, monofilament line, and the unyielding laws of physics. It was perhaps the most pathetic, yet poetic, Darwin Award ever earned on a seaside vacation. 10. The Ostrich Jockey, Misdirection Story. Some men aren't content with the quiet life. They need an audience. They need to prove repeatedly that they are tougher, braver, and just a little bit crazier than everyone else. Hank, an ostrich farmer from Texas, was one of these men. And his favorite party trick, the one he saved for impressing city folk, was riding Tyson, his largest and most notoriously belligerent male ostrich. Today, Hank's cousins were visiting from Dallas, and the stage was set. Tyson was a magnificent, terrifying creature, nearly 9 feet tall with a gaze that radiated pure, unadulterated malice. To fully appreciate the stupidity of Hank's stunt, you must understand that an ostrich's primary weapon isn't its beak, it's its legs. They are instruments of shocking power, capable of delivering a forward kick strong enough to kill a lion, with a 4-inch talon on their main toe that can disembowel a target with a single, brutal slash. Riding this animal was less like riding a horse and more like trying to rodeo a velociraptor. Hank's cousins were filming, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid excitement, fully expecting to capture a viral video of their relative being turned into a human piñata. Hank, fueled by bravado and 2 light beers, just grinned. "It's all about respect," he yelled over his shoulder as he climbed the fence of the enclosure. He cornered the agitated bird and in a move of surprising agility, vaulted onto its back. For a moment, it worked. Tyson erupted into a frenzy, darting around the pen in a chaotic, feathered blur. But Hank held on, whooping and hollering, his cowboy hat flying off his head. He was doing it. He was actually riding the feathered demon. The cousins cheered, their fear turning to genuine amazement. Hank was a legend. After a solid 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, Hank managed to steer the now-tiring ostrich towards the fence. He had conquered the beast. He had looked into the face of feathered death and spat in its eye. With a final triumphant shout, he slid off Tyson's back, landing gracefully on his feet. He turned to his cousins, arms raised in a V for victory, a massive, proud grin plastered across his face. He was savoring the perfect moment of triumph. It was a moment that lasted exactly 1.5 seconds. Because while all eyes, including Hank's, had been locked on the terrifying spectacle of Tyson, nobody had been paying attention to Gladys, a smaller, generally docile female ostrich who had been panicked by the commotion. As Hank took his first victorious step backwards, he stepped directly into the path of a 300-pound bird running at 40 miles per hour. There was no malice in Gladys's actions. She was simply fleeing, but the impact was as final as a cannonball. Hank was struck from behind and sent flying, landing in a crumpled, motionless heap against the fence post. His grand, death-defying performance had been a spectacular success. The star of the show had been tamed. He was killed by a confused extra running in the background. His cousins were left with the perfect, tragic footage. A man celebrating the victory of a battle he had just won, only to be utterly annihilated by a war he didn't even know he was in. 10 people. 10 terrible ideas, 10 permanent lessons from Mother Nature. Now, it's judgment time. Forget dumbest. Forget most creative. Let's talk about what really matters. In the comments, I want you to tell me, which of these 10 candidates do you feel the absolute least amount of sympathy for? Who was so arrogant, so willfully ignorant, that their demise feels less like a tragedy and more like a correction? A balancing of the universal books. Nominate your champion of idiocy below and justify your verdict. If you believe stupidity should be a spectator sport, the like button is your ticket. Subscribe for more proof that common sense is not so common.